Hi, everyone. I'm Fred Cook, coming to you live from USC. Thank you very much for joining us for the launch of the Relevance Report. I wish I was seeing you all in person. It's always so much fun to gather in the lobby and have wine and cheese with everybody. But tonight, I'm in the Media Center with Ron Antoinette and Cheryl Cook, and we're drinking iced tea. But welcome. 2020 has been one of the most chaotic years in modern history. Coronavirus infected our bodies and our minds. Quarantines drained our economy, protests rocked our communities, and political warfare divided our nation. And these events had a big impact on the public relations industry. While corporate communicators worked overtime to reassure their customers and protect their employees, the struggling economy led to canceled internships, salary cuts, and layoffs. And while brands rushed to support Black Lives Matter, their agencies released disappointing reports on their own diversity. And like never before, audiences devoured content. Consumers lived on the internet. Americans inhaled cable news. Governors convened daily press conferences. Corporations announced social initiatives. And activists mobilized on social media. Communications became essential. And that's why we devoted the 2021 edition of the Relevance Report to examining the impact of these events on the future of the PR profession. This year, the Relevance Report is our largest ever, with 45 essays from PR leaders, academics, and students, all associated with USC. This evening, you're going to hear from 12 of them, briefly discussing some of the issues and trends that will impact our jobs and our lives in 2021. We're also going to preview some of the relevance research we did to find out what's on the minds of Americans in this coming year. And you see on this slide that it's no surprise that COVID-19 is the topic that will continue to dominate the news, way ahead of other topics of interest like climate change and Medicare. But interestingly enough, food was the second choice, and that's what's been dominating my time during this pandemic. My colleague Jeff Cole, who runs the Center for Digital Future at USC, is going to explain what he thinks the long-lasting results of COVID-19 will be for all of us. And then Annenberg alum Heather Rim, who's a long-standing member of our board at the Center for Public Relations, is going to talk about how COVID affects one very important segment of our population.
I'm Jeffrey Cole. I run the Center for the Digital Future, which is based on the USC Annenberg School. And in my whole career, I've been interested in disruption, how things change other things. 20 years ago, we thought the internet was going to change everything and have been tracking it for the past 20 years in 35 countries. And sitting in the middle of the pandemic, this is the greatest disruption of our lifetime. Even during the Second World War, people had loved ones in harm's way. There were shortages, but we went to work, we went to school, movie theaters, restaurants were open, sports were played. We've been living through the biggest social science experiment of all time. And I think this is the first time in maybe 80 years when we know that everything is going to be reconsidered coming out of COVID. We're going to rethink how we work, how we learn. We're going to rethink how we travel, how we consume entertainment. And that's what I'm really interested in, how that's going to disrupt the old model. Now, lots of trends that started before COVID and are being accelerated. But the real question is, which things will revert back quickly? Which things may take a couple of years to come back to the way they were? And which change is permanent? And I think we're going to mark this period of 2020 as before 2020, as BC, before Corona, and AC, after Corona. And the question is, Will we quickly change our behaviors back and have a short memory? Or like my father, who carried the memory of the Depression with him for 50 years and changed his essential personality coming out of it, will we carry this with us forever? And one of the most interesting changes we found in the work going into the field in April and June is 37% of us say that even after there's a vaccine, we're going to keep our distance from other people. We may be entering an era, even after COVID is gone, that we view other people as a threat to stay a little bit far away from, because we're going to continue to have flus, hopefully no other pandemics. But we think some of the changes coming out of COVID are going to be quite profound and quite long.
Hi, I'm Heather Rim, and I earned a master's degree in communication management from USC Annenberg. I wrote my essay on the topic of loneliness in the era of COVID-19, and specifically I looked at the role that social media is playing as a bridge to connect people. I focused in on what we can learn from our wisest population, our seniors, who are sadly confronting loneliness at record and very dangerous levels. In fact, even before COVID, the US Surgeon General declared loneliness and social isolation among the world's older adult population a loneliness epidemic. Research tells us the pandemic has only doubled the size of this critical problem. I've had a front row seat to our social experiment as the daughter of one of the most socially connected people I know, my 91-year-old dad. As he will tell you, he leverages the power of social as a force for good, to keep moving, to keep his mind active, to listen and to learn, and to truly broaden his perspective. Importantly, my dad uses social media and other digital platforms to stay connected to friends and family, and also to build people up. I'm certain the positivity he brings to social media and the way he uses digital platforms to stay connected directly correlates to his overall health and well-being. And while we've all certainly experienced the divisive nature of social media, perhaps we should be taking our cues from people like my dad, who are putting this platform to its highest and very best use. In my opinion, it boils down to three things that we can learn from him. One, be curious. Look beyond the surface. My dad studies expressions and gestures, and he looks for hidden details. He tries to connect deeply with people in unexpected ways that often stop his followers in their tracks. Two, be thoughtful. My dad has created quite a following because of the poetic nature of his comments and posts. When you receive a reply from my dad, it's the start of a much bigger conversation. And third, demonstrate concern. You can always count on my dad for words of hope and encouragement, far beyond a simple thumbs up or a happy face emoji. Together, his approach creates a sense of community that extends far beyond social media, for sure. And while this is not a standalone cure for loneliness, I'm certain that with support from our younger generations, we can help our seniors leverage the power of social media and digital platforms to lessen the impact of this loneliness epidemic and change the course for generations to come.
Thank you, Heather and Jeff. Isolated and lonely. I hope we'll all be able to adapt as well as Heather's dad has. During the past 11 months, we've also witnessed a huge spike in political and social activism, which is the topic of our PR Future podcast, which you have not listened to, I highly recommend. We explore the growth of activism with activists and also communicators at companies like Levi's, Procter & Gamble, and Ben & Jerry's. And we discovered that activists and PR people actually agree on one important thing, and that is that voting in elections is the main way to create permanent change. And we'll see how that works out next week. The activist issue that dominated the conversation this year will continue to dominate it next year, and that is racial justice. which is the second major theme in the Relevance Report. Now, a couple of Annenberg alums and CPR board members are going to share their thoughts on activism and the state of race in our country. First up is USC alum Brenda Gonzalez, one of our younger board members who works for a California senator whose job may get a lot bigger next Tuesday. Followed by two agency founders, USC alum Julia Wilson and Bill Amata of the IW Group. And then we'll hear from someone on the front lines of diversity in the workplace, Marjanae Moore Roberts, who's the Chief Diversity Officer at Golan.
Everyone, my name is Brenda Gonzalez, and I am U.S. Senator Kamala D. Harris's State Press Secretary and Director of Public Engagement. So I've actually been working for her for almost 4 years now, but I've been so proud and so grateful to be working for her since 2015. And currently I am based out of her Los Angeles office. But of course, given the current climate, we are in telework posture until further notice. So I'd say what inspired me for my piece is that the activism from our youth, not only in 2020, but in like recent years, right? Youth activism is so critical and so relevant today. In 2020, our country faced so many challenges. We went through a worldwide pandemic that claimed hundreds and thousands of lives. We, went through folks who going through unemployment, housing crisis, foreign adversaries threatening our constitutional democracy. So what really inspired me is that if there's one thing to take away from all this chaos that's been happening around the world, it's that the rise in youth activism and the arc of change that it's inspired. And so, what we've seen is that the youth have taken to the streets, right? They've been protesting, they've been marching, and really that change is really what's inspiring, right? We're seeing our sisters and our brothers as young as 5 years old, shouting the names of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. We're seeing students organizing, educating adults about gun violence. And we're seeing women demanding respect while marching, to dismantle systems of oppression. So we're seeing a lot of things, and it's the young people in this country who are creating a movement that's sparking, an eruption of activism. And I think that's super important right now. And, all over the world, we're seeing young people pushing back against the status quo. So this isn't something new. And it's actually working. If you all remember the mass shooting at Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, which left, I believe, 17 people dead, students launched a gun safety campaign that resulted in 50 newly enacted reforms across the United States. That is huge, right? When you think about Swedish activist Greta Thunberg, she took to the halls of the United Nations during the world's climate summit action, the Climate Action Summit, to demand answers for the failure in recognizing climate change, which helped motivate more than 60 countries to eliminate their carbon footprints by 2050. So their activism is huge, right? It's made a huge impact. And so that's really what's inspired me. And I would say with, from a PR perspective, I think it's definitely an opportunity for us to really use our skills and to spread the word about, influencing on, spread the word about youth activism, spread the word about what's going on in our current climate, right? Whether it's influencing on social media, whether it's sharing posts, whether it's retweeting, whether it's just discovering new ways to talk about this moment on podcasts, on radio, on TV. I think it's definitely a huge opportunity for PR professionals. And really, this is why I wrote on this topic.
Hi, my name is Julia Wilson, and I'm the CEO and founder of Wilson Global Communications. We are an international public relations consultancy here in Washington, D.C. The title of my essay for the Relevance Report is Tear Down That White Wall. And I talk about my experiences and observations as an African-American woman in the public relations industry. When I graduated from USC in 1991, I must have sent out over 200 resumes to various public relations agencies, news media outlets, and other communications companies. And I either got no response or a slew of rejection letters. And what I learned then and what I continue to see now is institutionalized racism. A systematic racism that does not include Black people. I see white decision makers hiring people who look like them. They pay for them to go to conferences and seminars so that they can excel in their leadership positions. They get promoted. They go from one agency to the next, and then they circle back again. And I watch that over and over again. But I've seen, and you've seen, in the streets, protests by multicultural generation protesting against these kinds of things. And what I'm pleading with the PR industry to do is to take a look at their hearts and their minds and make a change. I provide some takeaways in my essay because whether it's unconscious bias or intentional, we have to change. I mean, the corporate brands are being forced to make changes, and some of them have already started to do that. I mean, thank God we've gotten rid of Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben. But now our industry really has to work hard, and we have to not only understand what the right thing is to do, but also be committed to doing the right thing. So some of the takeaways I talk about is to take the lead, hire Black people in your firms, promote them to C-suites, include Black people on your boards of directors, hire and partner and collaborate with Black consultants, consulting firms, bring people in who are Black, who can tell their own stories and show their own images, and promote Black brands. We all have to make a change right now. I mean, this is the time, this is the opportunity to make that change because the peace and the prosperity of our great nation depends on it. Thank you.
My name is Bill Amata, and I'm the Chairman and Chief Connectivity Officer of IW Group. We're an intercultural agency focusing on the growing multicultural markets here in the U.S. I'm proud to be a part of the USC Relevance Report for 2021, and my essay is Myths in History Marginalize Asian Americans. If you're familiar with George Santayana, a well-known Spanish-American philosopher and essayist, he once said, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." Now, if you're from a historically underrepresented community here in the United States, you'll understand what I mean. Whenever there's a war, whenever there's immigration problems, whenever there's a terrorist attack or a disease that impacts a lot of Americans, we have to find a scapegoat. And so when COVID-19 was first detected in February, we saw a rise in anti-Asian violence, discrimination, and bias in our country. And so in my essay, I focus a little bit about the history of Asian Americans and some of the myths that actually impact our community adversely. But I also have some recommendations to the greater PR community on what we can do to make sure that Asian Americans are supported, embraced, sponsored, and mentored so that we can not only tell our stories, but we can share them widely with people all across our country. So I hope you'll have a chance to read my essay, and I welcome any comments that you may have. Thank you, and thank you for supporting the USC Relevance Report for 2021.
the role of the Chief Inclusion and Diversity Officer has changed quite a bit over the years. I think in the early days, it was really focused on compliance. A lot of the role focused around affirmative action and making sure employers weren't exposed to lawsuits. Over time, that role evolved, I think, to be more proactive and more focused on both acquiring talent from different backgrounds and developing that talent once it was in-house. So Chief Diversity Officers shifted their focus to really zone in on a couple of individuals who were at the company and to help them matriculate into the upper echelons of the organization. Now, that was effective for sure for those individuals that it touched directly, but it didn't result in long-term sort of wholesale change that we're looking for. If you fast forward even a little more, I think the role began to take a more prominent place at the sort of corporate level or the aesthetic of the corporate level, and started to make its way into the agenda, the strategic agenda over the years, and even into some boardroom agendas. And that progress was not insignificant. It was an important part of the overarching story. But again, I think that the role was largely not understood, and that the pathways to success and how to use and partner with the Chief Diversity Officer was not as well understood as we are beginning to understand today. If you fast forward just into the last 6 months, that evolution continues. We've learned so much about the importance of how societal issues and events play a role in how people show up at work. We've learned a lot about the role of allies, and I think for the first time, many people are starting to see just how deeply systemic the issues that Black and brown people face in our society are, including everything from the social justice system and of course in our corporate systems as well. So this has given us a chance to reflect. It's given us a chance to rethink and reassess the role. I think over the last 6 months, due to how just raw the examples have been. If you look at George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and unfortunately many others, bringing those situations and examples very much to the forefront and for everyone to see. I think that's been very shocking for people who haven't been as close to it over the last several years or for a lifetime. And so the role has evolved, I think, again, to in some ways where we've become therapists. We've started to help people understand their place in the ecosystem, whether or not they belong to a targeted group or not. We've started to really help people begin to shape their own point of view and understand the ways in which they can help support other people in these targeted groups and begin the journey on their own. I think the future for this work is bright because I think now we are at a place where we can see that the role has to live at a place where it can influence the entire organization, right? We're no longer talking about putting diversity, equity, and inclusion officers into a silo within the far-reaching corners of the organization. We're now seeing that it's going to take a prominent role, that these officers, we have to sit alongside the other core functions of the organization. So your chief product officers, your chief revenue officers, your chief financial officer, all of these roles and the individuals in the roles have to play in harmony to really create the opportunity for deep systemic change and lasting impact. It's a great evolution, but absolutely the work continues.
Thank you, Marjane and Bill and Julia. And Brenda, like you, I have a lot of hope for your generation that they're going to fix a lot of the things that my generation didn't. This past year, we saw brands act in ways we never imagined before, sometimes playing the role you normally associate with government. They managed huge challenges in their business. They provided essential services during the pandemic, and they supported the concept of racial justice and Black Lives Matter. And as you can see from this chart, some of these brands' proactive efforts help build their corporate reputation with consumers. 3 of the center's board members are going to talk to you about the role brands will play in the coming year. First, Stephanie Corzette from Disney is going to speak about what you do when your primary business is completely shut down. Then Edelman's president, Matt Harrington, and their chief diversity officer, Trish Smith, are going to share Edelman's perspective on taking action. And Melissa Wagner-Zorkin, the founder and CEO of We Communications, is going to discuss the power of purpose and the role of employees in that effort. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Corzette, and I oversee global external communications and media relations for Disney's Parks, Experiences, and Products division. I wanted to share a few things that we've learned since we've started navigating the global pandemic. It's something all of us as crisis communicators have been working on since January. And for us at Disney, it started when we had to close our theme parks in Asia. It was go time for us. And as I think back to that time, and what we learned and what we continue to learn from this time, there are really 3 important principles that rise to the top. The first is, it was important, and it is important, to stay informed, to use research, to listen, to adapt, and to influence your actions. For all of us, we started paying very close attention to what was coming out of the World Health Organization and the CDC, and to use the research also to help inform our communications. One example that we learned early on is that folks really didn't want to hear about your products. They wanted to hear about health and safety and how you're going to prioritize their health and safety as well as those of your employees. So that really helped us think about how we position our communications and how we deployed them. The second important point was how important it was to keep communication flowing to our teams, your consumers, and your partners. So we leaned very heavily to our digital channels during these times just to be open and honest and transparent. We focused our communications coming out of our blog and social media channels. In fact, our Twitter handle, for example, was really a top source of news. And our chief medical officer became our chief spokesperson, sharing information on our blog and also directly with reporters and media. The final point I'll make is how important it has been to find innovative ways to focus on the thing that your brand does best. And for all of us at Disney, our brand is all about bringing people together. And so when you actually couldn't physically bring those people together, we had to think of new and innovative ways to bring that Disney magic. So our marketing and PR teams, they came up with a great solution called Disney Magic Moments. It's a website that we launched, and it's been a way for us to share that connection with our guests by sharing special Disney park recipes, to behind the scenes look at, for example, our animal keepers and how they were caring for animals during this time. It's been a great way to build that connectivity and that Disney theme park experience, even when folks are not actually at our parks. So my final points on all of this is that what's really clear is that with everything changing minute to minute, communicators really need to help their brands act nimbly. And it's important to build brand confidence in an uncertain environment. And so it's been critical to share all of the real-time decisions that your company's been making and to share them widely with all of your constituencies. Honestly, the best brands are the ones that are using communications as a free-flowing tool to educate, to inform, and to maintain connectivity that everyone can use, especially right now. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Matt Harrington, President and COO of Edelman, and I'm pleased as well to be a member of USC's Annenberg School's Board of Advisors. I'm also grateful to be joined by a colleague of mine.
Hi, I'm Trish Smith, and I serve as Edelman's Global Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer.
The essay that Trish and I submitted for the Relevance Report looks at the social unrest of these past many months and really examines systemic racism in the US. We understand now that there's enormous expectation on the part of brands and all of us as communicators to step up and take action at this time.
Matt, you said it. Companies must not only say something, but they must do something within their walls and beyond. And one of the interesting findings for me was why companies have to do this, why their audiences demand that they do something. And the number 1 and 2 responses were because it's a moral obligation, and 2, because they owe it to their people. So there's a moral obligation that companies now have more than ever before to address the issues surrounding systemic racism.
Absolutely true. So we hope you find our essay both thought-provoking and optimally action-provoking. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Melissa Wagner-Zorkin, and I am Global CEO of We Communications. And I often get asked, so how many people work for you now? And my response is, well, about 1,300, but to clarify, I work for them. We work together. I firmly believe that all CEOs will be far stronger if we are really tuned in to our people. Now, this has always been true, and it is especially true now with our long overdue racial awakening. Today, I wanted to share with you a recent experience around the importance of using what I'll call our inside voices. In this case, checking brand messages with broad representation from our people. To support our 2025 business plan, our team created a rallying cry around our forever goal to put people and purpose always first. And we landed on We Rise. Now, the feedback was very positive when we unveiled this concept around the globe, but another perspective was being shared among employees more quietly in one of our employee resource groups. There were several people who felt that We Rise felt like co-opted language used during the US civil rights movement and was triggering for some. So in our enthusiasm for the concept, this angle had been missed. And this was a reminder to always include a broad group of our most important stakeholders in our decision making, our people. To run a relevant and purpose-driven organization, we have to listen to and learn from our inside voices. Annenberg's 2021 Relevance Report underlines the necessity to channel internal passions. The aftermath of George Floyd's tragic death is an example of employees needing to know exactly where you stand on an issue. And this means building in a new layer of feedback among diverse voices and incorporating that across every touch point. Constant learning and constant growth and constant working to get it right can be uncomfortable, but it's an imperative as we continue our evolution as empathetic and inclusive leaders. To evolve successfully in today's world, we have to ensure broad representation, and that's the power of our people's voices in action.
Thank you, Stephanie, Matt, Tricia, and Melissa. If you'd like to hear more from Melissa, you can tune into our podcast with her that just launched today. Now let's look a little bit into the future. As Jeff alluded in the beginning, many of the simple experiences that we enjoyed as part of our daily lives have simply disappeared this year. And as you can see, again, eating seems to be at the top of the list of the things that people miss and are looking forward to. But this moratorium on events has had a huge impact on business and has eliminated many of the marketing and PR activities that we employ in our business. And now USC grad Adrienne Cadena, who runs the experiential marketing firm Havas Street, is going to talk to us about where her business is headed in a time when there are no experiences. Board member Gary Brotman is going to predict where AI might land in the coming year. And Matt Furman, the CCO of Best Buy, is going to tell us a little bit about the future of retail.
Hi, my name is Adrienne Cadena, and I'm the president of Havas Street. We're the experiential marketing arm of the Greater Havas Network, and I wrote my article about the future of live experiences. And during March, when everything stopped due to COVID-19, our client programs paused, and we were forced to become students of information, consumer behaviors, trends, and really pivot our strategies and our creative thinking. And there were 4 areas that bubbled up for us that we believe as a team are going to be impactful in 2021. The first is a hyper-focused shift. Our activations are going from large-scale festivals to tiered activations that can be scalable as far as an intimate gathering and focusing on quality interactions with our loyal customers. Second is pastimes reinvented. Everyone staying at home wanted to still engage and do things in a fun and safe way. So there's new activations and themes that we're utilizing, like drive-up movies or pod concerts, or even retail activation parking lot events, keeping things fun, but also safe. The third is contactless technology. We've used technology in a lot of different ways, but now we're looking at it differently, bringing back things like QR codes, but also incorporating new things like gesture vending machines to keep the engagements on site fun, yet very safe and in nature. And then the fourth is acts of kindness. Brands were very eager to thank essential workers like hospital workers, nurses, doctors, but now that network is expanding to parents, to teachers, and beyond. And this is something that brands should be doing throughout the pandemic, but also beyond that, to ensure that humanitarian perspective overall. And lastly, we're just trying to get comfortable with change. This landscape is going to be evolving over 2021, and it's something that we need to embrace to really move our industry forward. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Gary Brotman, Vice President of Product Management and Marketing at a UK-based startup called Second Mind. And I wrote my piece for the Relevance Report this year on facial recognition. It's a fairly hot topic. And I discussed the pros and the cons and the direction of travel of the technology. It's fair to say that facial recognition has exploded everywhere. It's on the devices that you carry with you. Government institutions and companies use it pretty much every day. And the benefits the technology promises are things like convenience and the experiences around you and personalization of the devices and the utilities that you have in front of you. And there's also the promise of security to protect you at home and abroad. But the negatives at the moment have been outweighing the positives. There's fear of threats to individual privacy, fear of unlawful surveillance. The technology has been known to be racially biased in its programming, and the technology in general is very nascent, and it's not foolproof by any means. In fact, one of the first people in the United States to be arrested because of inadequate facial recognition was arrested this year in Detroit because the technology was used by itself and the human being was not there to have any oversight. There are hundreds of police departments that are using the technology today unregulated with very little oversight at a local or government level. Companies like Microsoft, as a response, Microsoft, IBM, and Amazon have chosen to pause or cease distribution of their facial recognition technology for the moment. We'll see how long that lasts. But we've seen patterns like this in the past with new technology, especially those that are promising. We're in an early stage of the life cycle, and over time, this will get better, especially if three things happen. One is regulation and standardization. So you must regulate the technology, its use, its development, and how data is even collected. The second is AI alone is not going to solve the problem on its own. You need to have human beings that are experts utilizing the technology and rendering the judgment. And the last is trust, transparency and trust. And trust in our institutions today is certainly waning with conflict following suit. But the pendulum will eventually swing the opposite direction. And I think the benefits will far outweigh the positives. And I predict that facial recognition will become commonplace in the next few years.
Hey everybody, my name is Matt Furman and I'm the Chief Communications and Public Affairs Officer for Best Buy and a proud board member of the USC Annenberg Center for Public Relations. I was asked to talk a bit about the paper I wrote for this year's Relevancy Report, and it's not surprisingly on retail. I made the case that retail in many cases is actually thriving, not just because of the craziness of the pandemic, but because of the way retailers have begun to serve their customers. There's something known as multi-channel, which refers to, in retailing, to the notion that we serve customers in different channels. Your home channel, your online channel, and of course your physical store channel. In many cases, people believe the physical stores were dying, and for some retailers that's true. But for the best run retailers, we begin to serve our customers across channels or multi-channel. For instance, many people come into a Best Buy with their phone in hand, doing the research that they began at home. in the store and then making the purchase in store. And yet, even more people actually do the research at home, go on their computer or their tablet or their phone, buy the thing that they want from Best Buy or other stores, and then pick it up at store, either curbside or actually in the store. All of these interactions are designed to make the purchasing process absolutely seamless and meet the customer where they want to be met. In this regard, retail has not just become something that people need to do, but something people want to do because it's something that is easy to do. And stores, which used to be a singular, and again in many people's eyes, a dying part of retail, has become integrated into the full process. So what does this mean for the students at the Annenberg Center? It means that the stories you're telling are going to become more complicated and more nuanced than ever, but they're going to be more important than ever. And what do we know? A good retailer executing well with a story well told will thrive not just today, but well into the future. If you want to read my paper, please check out this year's Relevance Report. Take care.
Thank you, Matt and Adrienne and Gary. And as Gary knows, I had a little run-in with facial recognition recently. Facebook sent me a series of posts and asked me to tag myself in them because their AI systems identified them as me. But actually, there were 8 different photos of Governor Mario Cuomo. I mean, really? Mario Cuomo? Isn't Brad Pitt on Facebook too? Anyway, thanks, Gary, for reminding me of that. And as Matt said, you can download the copy of the Relevance Report from our website, or you can email me and I'll send you a hard copy, of which we have quite a few. Now I'd like to invite our contributors, our panelists, to join me and see if we have any questions from the audience. Hi, Gary. Hi, Jeff. Hi, Bill, Stephanie, Adrienne, everybody. Nice to see you. Does anyone in the audience have a question that I can, we'd like to address to our panelists? Just enter it into the chat. While we're waiting, maybe we could advance to the next slide. We ask, you know, even in the fashion world, COVID seems to be a dominating factor. We ask people across America, which slogans would you wear to work if you were allowed to? And wearing a mask was the #1 choice. But then the second and third choice was Make America Great Again and Black Lives Matter. And a lot of companies got into trouble around this issue this year about what their employees should wear to work and how they should respond to it. And we found that most companies don't really have an existing policy about employee activism. And we were sort of wondering where this issue was going to go this coming year in the workplace. And I wondered if, Marjane, do you have any thoughts on this idea of employee activism and what people can say and do at work versus what they do outside their jobs?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. And thank you, Fred. Thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me to the discussion. It's been fascinating this evening. You know, this one comes up every 4 years or so with political slogans in particular. And, you know, I think the key point for companies to be aware of is that there has to be some consistency and some framework for making these decisions. You know, wearing a mask, these are not all things are not created equal on this list. Obviously, wearing a mask is a little bit different than what the slogan on the mask is. So I think you have to look at these in the context of, you know, what they're meant to address. In the case of wearing a mask, I think a lot of people would view that as being very much about health and, you know, very much about something that's tied to science. When you start to get into political slogans, I think that is a little bit of a different territory, and companies really have to create a framework that feels consistent for their employees. You can't support the slogan of one party without supporting the slogan potentially of another party or something else that's considered a political statement. But I think that these are issues that all of us in corporate America, and particularly communicators, are going to need to be ready to help folks address. And to the degree that we can sort of decouple politics from what some of these issues are, like, wearing a mask, depending on your point of view, this is not necessarily political. And so really helping people pull it apart and trying to create a framework that looks at the proper context for each of them will be important as we move forward.
Matt, I wonder, at Best Buy, do you have a policy about the kinds of clothes people can wear at work? Is Matt there? Maybe not. Okay, we'll skip that and we'll move to the next slide, please, Jim. We ask people also on important issues in the coming year whose opinions you will trust. And doctors ranked number 1, journalists were second, and educators were third. It seems that politicians ranked at 3%, were way down the list. And it was interesting to us that the answer that was most often chosen, 30% of the people said none of the above. So the trust has really eroded in a lot of our institutions and our various spokespeople. And I would love for somebody on the panel to address how we can rebuild the trust that may have been lost over this past year. Would anybody like to tackle that?
I'm happy to take a stab if you don't mind. Well, first, just on doctors being the most trusted, we went into the field in April and June, and in the particular case of COVID, in particular individuals, Dr. Fauci towered over the president, any governor, anyone else. And in the last couple of weeks, I've been in conversations with partners in Chile, partners in Australia, partners in France, asking, who do you trust? Who's your Dr. Fauci? The answer, not surprisingly, is Dr. Fauci all over the world. So this is the credibility, unlike anything we've seen in a very long time. But to your question, Fred, how do you build? I don't think you can build it any other way than consistently telling the truth as fairly, as objectively as you can, to keep telling the truth. And I think people begin to notice that.
So telling the truth is the best way to build the trust. Thank you, Jeff. Any other comments from our panelists?
I think that I'd also add something, Fred, if I can.
Sure.
I liked what you said, Jeffrey, but I would also add that I think we're being judged on what we do quite a bit more, quite frankly, than what we say. And so it's all about showing, not just talking. And so the track record that comes from making sure we consistently take actions when we say it, we talk about what we can be counted on, and then we do it, and then we remind people if we don't do it that we didn't, and here's our commitment. So I think that right now there's a lot of conversation for sure, but those are being believed are those who are really taking the action and really doing it and sticking to it and measuring it, and then making sure that they follow up on it.
Thanks, Melissa. And we have a question for Julia from the audience. Julia, what do you think PR agencies can do specifically to address racism in the workplace?
Hi, Fred. Well, thank you so much for that question. Well, first of all, I think that we need leaders to take the lead and actually, first of all, what I call the 3Ds, address the issue of denial, denigration, and deferment of action, because action has to take place. What we need are Black seats in the C-suites. We need a seat at the table so that we can make decisions and add our voices to the decisions that are being made. I've learned that the PR industry has a makeup of 89.9% white people. And that just won't move forward in the right way from a business standpoint, because our audiences, our consumers are getting browner and browner. I mean, African Americans have a spending power right now of $1.4 trillion. And so if agencies in our corporate brands that we represent want to tap into that market and the other minority markets that is only going to increase, then they will have to change their modus operandi. They will have to change the way they hire people and the way they promote. Because what we have now with the white wall that's up, we have to tear that down. And so I'm asking leaders to take the lead, bring in some Black voices, add some seats to the table in the C-suites and the boardrooms. And let's work together to not only tear down that wall, but build a colorful pathway so that we can have mutual success and mutual prosperity. And so that's my answer. I hope that answers that question.
Thank you, Julia. And we have a question for you, Bill. It's sort of two questions combined into one. I know you work with a lot of millennials, but what is the job market like now in PR? And what advice would you give to your younger self as someone entering the field at the moment?
Oh, I do want to know if I could comment really quickly on Julia's.
Sure, you can.
I want to say that it's great to add more seats to the C-suite for Black Americans, but it makes no difference if the Black people that are there have no power. So my feeling is you could put as many people as you want in the C-suite, but if they have no authority, no power, no say, no decision-making opportunity, that won't make any difference at all. But I also think that we have to hold people accountable at the senior ranks to make sure that people succeed in PR agencies and in corporations. If we do not hold people accountable, nothing will change. If I were to give advice to myself moving forward, I want to tell the people that are in decision-making positions that we need to pull like Adrienne Cadena sooner. Younger people, Gen Z and millennials, boomers and Gen Xers, we hide things from them. And if we're going to do anything about jobs and public relations, we need to pull younger people in earlier about what they need, what they look for, what they aspire to do, and how they can contribute not only to the well-being of an agency or a corporation, but to the well-being of society. So my advice to people is my younger self is get engaged sooner, and don't let anyone tell you that you can't have access to the people that make decisions in this country.
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate that. And Stephanie, here's a good one for you. How do you balance the seriousness of the 2020 events of COVID and racial justice, et cetera, with your brand's tone in communications? How do you achieve that balance?
Well, I think it's a really good question. And I think it's really important to read the room. In my essay, I talked a lot about, staying really, attuned to what's going on, the research, et cetera, and try and figure out what the right moments are for certain messages. So I think you just have to, for me and the work I do at Disney, it's really about, just trying to make sure that the messages you're putting out don't appear tone deaf. So if we're going through a hard time, or in the news, for example, we're gonna avoid certain topics. We're gonna think about things that might be a little bit more palatable, and also just if there's really serious things going on, it's not the time to be frivolous on your social media channel. It's the time to listen and to if we have something to contribute, it's a time to contribute. But more often than not, it's honestly being tempered in how you actually use your tools and when you decide and how you decide to use your voice.
Thanks, Stephanie. Jim, could you put up the next slide? We asked people which meeting platforms they'd be using in the coming year, and it's obvious that many of us are still going to be working from home. And that has a lot of implications on the workplace, especially in the agency world. And Melissa, I wonder what you thought about how do you create a corporate culture or maintain one when the only time you see people are in little boxes on your computer?
I'm sure that everybody on this call and out in the audiences listening feel the same way as I do, that it is much more difficult, but also that you've now started to find many creative ways around it. And so I think that the great thing about going virtual is that it basically crashes down hierarchy. And so the good news about that is we've created in our company a way where everyone can just talk to everyone. And I think everybody is feeling a lot more included. And so people will, even introverts will tell you, all right, so I was actually called upon, I was listened to, and I really feel a part of it. So yes, it's difficult, but if you construct your day into 30-minute segments, if you give breaks, if you have fun, if you actually challenge people to do new and different things, if you actually build constructs where people are just getting up and doing different things versus just sitting like we are right now, it can actually work. I also think that there's a lot of challenge around the idea of pounding through all of the work with a client. And so we have to introduce for our clients as well breaks and understanding about, well, what is the, what do we want to achieve here? And then can we do it in a different way? So creativity, we figured out new and different ways to actually do brainstorming, which is a tough one to do when you're just sitting virtually. And so there are a lot of ways. I will tell you though, because like today I met with all of our brand new interns. It is difficult to onboard. It is difficult to onboard new people. We've hired 90 new people over the summer, and that's the most difficult one of all. So we call them individually. We work with them to understand their needs, and it is difficult. And I think that's the toughest one, Fred, is if you're new and you're joining a company, how do you really feel about the culture? And how do you really feel about the people? Was talking to someone today and she said, I've never really even met anybody through the entire interview process. And also the, the part where she's meeting with people and learning even the company values. So it's difficult, but we can do it. And we just have to mix it up a bit.
Adrienne, have you found some good technologies that help overcome this problem of no one ever seeing anyone except on a computer?
I mean, I think we're using the same technology that everyone else is in terms of Zoom, Teams, Google Hangouts, all of those things. I think it's just important to also mention that we don't want people to get technology and Zoom fatigue. I think sitting on these video calls for hours and hours every day is really tough. So I mean, for a call that I may have made to my team before, now we're doing a video call. And I think we need to ask ourselves why, what's the purpose? Do we need to do that? What are the technologies that make the most sense to create that culture? And I think the main point that Melissa made too is just being creative. We have to think outside the box on how to connect people. And that doesn't always involve a Zoom video call or, some sort of technological piece. It can be very simple, things that we may have taken for granted before, sending a note to someone in the mail or, just basic things that people, I think, are craving to create that bond and maintain that connection with your teammates and your company.
I think, Fred, there's also, to the point you're making, Adrienne, the idea of leading into a meeting and leading out of the meeting. And so you send cupcakes and you're eating them together. Yes, it's small. Yes, it sounds frivolous, but they got it. And they're sitting there with it, and then people are eating it together. And then there's a way out of the meeting too. So it doesn't all have to happen right in the little box.
Jeff, what's the bigger impact on offices and the real estate, and where are we going to work? Everybody's going to be at home.
Well, in our work, we ask people when there's a vaccine and they can go back to work the way they always did, but could work at home, what do they want to do? 10% say they want to go back just like before. 30% say they never want to go back. I think they're sincere. I don't think they really understand what they're saying. I think they're going to miss workmates. But 30 right now think they're never going to go back. And 60% say they're going to go back 1 to 4 days a week. So we don't think that there's going to be millions upon millions of people only working at home. But we think there are going to be millions of people working at home 2 to 4 days a week, enough to change traffic, although in LA it does seem to be coming back, sadly, enough to change public transportation, housing patterns, the nature of cities. I think, and from the people we've talked to, I think companies are still going to require people to be there one day, one morning a week, to be together, to interact, to pick up on what Melissa was saying, new people to feel part of the culture and to be at the water cooler or the cafeteria. But clearly the open office may be gone forever. We're looking, I don't know anyone who runs an office who doesn't say, do we need all this space? Do we need any space? The happiest people in the world are the ones whose leases come up in the next 6 months. The unhappiest ones are the ones who just signed 5 or 10-year leases. So this is going to be permanent, but it's not going to be a permanent move to what we're doing now. But what we're doing now is going to become a permanent part of our work lives to some degree.
And Gary, there's a technology question for you, or one about information. There's so much, we're picking up so much information. It's from one of our students at USC, so much information on social media, and there seems to be opposing views and opposing facts on both sides. So if truth is the way to build trust, how does the average person figure out what's true and what's not? Is there a technology that's going to help us with that problem?
I don't know anything specific that can help. Any specific technologies can help anybody determine right or wrong. It really comes down to or fact or fiction. It requires critical thinking and an individual who's willing to take that next step to research a topic. If you see a headline, read the article, go find another source, find 2 or 3 sources. I don't think that I think individuals are more apt to just grab what they see and run with it, especially if it maps to their view. I mean, confirmation bias is very easy. But it really comes down to an individual's own desire to want to know the truth and be willing to even accept something that may not fit their worldview as being fact or fiction. So I wish I had a technology answer. I don't have one. It really comes down to the desire of the individual.
Adrienne, you're one of the younger members of our panel. How do people in your generation, when they're getting all their information on their phones, know what's real and what's not?
I mean, I think a lot of what Gary said is true. I think the problem is that, speaking on behalf of my generation, a lot of them don't spend the time to really go to different sources, to see what other articles are being written, to understand where their news is coming from. I think a lot of people are taking news from their social media feed instead of, reading the newspaper. I just started subscribing to a newspaper for the first time ever. And I think for me, it was a way to get off my phone, to start looking for news in a different way and experiencing it in a different way. And I think it's hard. There's so many messages coming to us at any given time of the day that it's hard to sort through everything that's coming at you. And I think it honestly takes somebody who does have the critical thinking and who wants to find the truth and the knowledge that will help empower them and to take the action that they want to take. And that really comes down to a lot of time commitment and personal choice to do so.
Fred, if I could just build on something Adrienne said, and thanks for that nice comment about the younger members of the panel. Rudy Giuliani tried to shop what may have been Russian disinformation on Hunter Biden, and the Wall Street Journal, Rupert Murdoch's paper, wouldn't take it. The New York Times did, I thought, a very powerful piece last week about the return of the gatekeeper. And after 20 years of seeing all this information online, there are some pretty good signs that we may be requiring or needing or seeking gatekeepers again, which is why Adrienne subscribing to a paper is an encouraging sign. That doesn't mean papers can't be irresponsible, but now we may be relying on people curating and verifying truth the way we used to. And that's a pretty powerful trend if it's real and it continues.
Here's an interesting question from one of my colleagues at Golan. She said, with people are so exhausted from all of this change and the pandemic, how do brands authentically communicate with them in a way that's meaningful? Are they serious? Are they funny? What is the way to reach people when they're so exhausted from stress and the life we're living? Anybody have any thoughts on that? It's a tough question.
I think it's important to put communications out that are unique. So I think it's just trying to find a way to do something that not everyone else is doing, and then also just true to your brand. So I think part of that question, I saw part of that question. I think there was a question around is it empathy or is it escapism? Yeah. And I honestly think it's really dependent on what your brand does and who your brand is. I think the escapism was an alarm bell when I saw that, because I think at Disney, that's what we do. You go to our parks, you escape into a whole nother world. If you go to Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, you're actually on the planet of Batuu, and that's what that is. So I do think if you're able to provide some of those experiences and those connections with people and some of those things and remind people of the things that we all really love to do. I don't know. I think that's something we found a lot of success in. I think that it's a way for you to break through in an authentic way that's for your brand.
Anybody else have any thoughts? I know many of you saw at the beginning of the pandemic a collage of advertisements that different brands put out, and they all looked exactly the same. And it was amazing. They're all spending money to say the same thing, and you couldn't tell which was which. And so I think being unique is a really good idea, Stephanie. Jeff, here's one for you. What's the pathway forward for education and learning?
Well, sadly, learning online has been a pretty dismal failure. No disrespect to anyone involved. Teachers who had never heard of Zoom, never planned to teach online, had 4 days to get their courses online. And online learning doesn't even make sense for anyone under 12 years old in any meaningful way. So we think learning is going to be one of the things that reverts back almost immediately, as soon as possible, when the pandemic ends, or maybe even before. But I do think we're seeing some hybrid methods that may survive. For college students, the old model of going away to school and coming home at Thanksgiving and going back for the last 3 weeks, that may be dead forever. They may come home at Thanksgiving and stay there till the next semester ends. We think some courses may end up online. Of course, there have always been great advantages to learning online for people who have to be at home for childcare or family reasons, who live outside of cities where the schools or the better schools that they may have access to than some of the schools in rural communities. So we think some of it will survive in a hybrid, but we think almost all learning is going to return back to the way it was.
And Gary, here's a question for you about AI. Will AI be able to predict civil unrest? And if so, what will be the role of the PR professional?
That's a good question. AI is already doing that today in China. So, facial recognition specifically has been, I guess, arguably accepted in China. Culturally, I think the government having the visibility into everybody's life has been just commonplace. But technology today can determine when crowds of people start to stir up, and if there's excessive movement or aggressive movement, be able to determine if there's going to be a riot or some sort of unrest. So it's here. if it becomes commonplace in the United States where you can actually do crowd control or detect some type of disturbance with a crowd of people, again, it's already here. The question then about how does this affect the PR professional? I think that if you're working communications for a local town or city where something like this happens, you'll have a better opportunity to get a message out that something's taking place. But I think in the United States, since facial recognition is so polarizing, when you're using technology like that, which is intended to be for security, you're going to get a lot of scrutiny. So on one side, you want to help the community. On the other side, as a communications professional, you're defending the city's choice for implementing technology. It's kind of a double-edged sword, but A, the technology is already there. It hasn't been rolled out here in the US. And then B, if you're in comms, you're telling the story about why this is great, why it's great for security, why it's great for the safety of the citizens. And at the same time, it's polarizing.
Thanks, Gary. Here's Marjane, a question for you. It's a good question. How can PR agencies work with clients who may have very different approaches or visions or policies on how to approach racial justice and other serious social issues?
Yeah, thanks, Fred. No, it actually is a good one. I mean, this is part of this is the work, right? I think a lot of times trying to understand what the client is trying to do is key. And I think a couple of people have mentioned values before. This is where you have to know who you are as a brand and particularly as communicators and what you want to stand for. There's always the opportunity to, look for ways to align yourself, your own brand with the work that a client is doing. But in those times when you cannot, you really have to pull it apart and figure out what the risk is. I do think we have to be careful, though. I don't think that. I think there's a point at which we can go too far with saying that we'll never work with people who don't align with everything we believe on every topic. I don't think you can paint that with such broad strokes, because it continues to sort of exacerbate the polarization, as Gary mentioned on that and other issues. So I think we got to start to look at the nuances again. I really do. I think we have to start to really consider what are we standing for when we stand up, make sure that we know that and that we're not just falling in line with some kind of previously established idea or ideal. And really do the work, do the work of figuring out, what are people really trying to say? Why are they trying to communicate what they're trying to communicate? And what role do we play in that? There will absolutely be times when you should not. I think each brand will have to make that decision to determine where that line is. But there's going to be times when I think you support your client because that's what you signed up to do. But it is certainly not for the weak of heart. It's something that has to be dug into with a lot of respect and a lot of analysis. So, but that's a great question. That's one for your class. I've put that on the end of semester exam.
Thanks, Marjane. Here's an agency question. We have people on our panel and on our board from small agencies and large. And one of the professors at USC has a question on the landscape. How do you see big agencies versus small agencies prospering in the future, given the situation? Does size matter? Bill, Melissa, Julia?
I think size matters. I think a smaller agency is significantly more nimble, quick on its feet, often has smaller budgets. And I have to say, when you have a smaller budget, frankly, you're a lot more creative about what you can do. And We is doing a great job. So I'm not too, We's a big agency, but they do an amazing job. So I'm not saying anything bad about We or Edelman because I think they do great work. But I do think that if you're in a smaller agency, you have an opportunity to touch on multiple number of clients and projects that you may not have that opportunity to do if you're working for a bigger company. But I also think that in our agency, we can elevate an idea so quickly and move it to market literally in a couple of hours. But I do want to go back to what Margaret was saying. I do believe if you're hiring an agency, it's our obligation to tell the truth. Companies pay us for a reason, to give them the best counsel possible. And I do feel that we have to pick and choose the companies we work with, because if the companies are not aligned with our company's values, I feel that we should walk away from those companies.
I would add that I'm not sure size is the right nomenclature to get caught up on in terms of judging an agency, in the sense that what matters is agility. I think Bill said that really well, and creativity, and also the ability to push back and make sure that the truth is told. I also think that size, though, can play a role, and which is why we are a global company, not one of the biggest, but not one of the smallest, right there in the middle, because we can offer that the global piece in terms of making sure that we can, bring a campaign to market that actually has tentacles in all of the various countries. And I think many very large companies are looking for that, and those are, obviously good long-term relationships. But I agree with Bill that one of the things that's most, I think, important and powerful is when a big agency can be nimble, can be small, can put diverse teams together, can have the client at the center and not let, P&Ls and things like that get in the way, which is why we, by the way, remain independent. So I think it's a really great question, but it's less about size and more around what are you actually delivering? Is it fully integrated? Is there data at a through line through everything that's done? And all the things really that clients are asking for. So it's more around, can you put a great blend together for the team? And can you make sure that data is at the heart of everything that's done? And can you make sure that the nimble is still there?
Thanks, Melissa. And we have another question from a USC student about purpose-driven communications. With a lot of brands getting involved with social causes this year, especially with Black Lives Matter, how can brands make sure that what they're doing is viewed as authentic and genuine, and not just some self-conscious effort to do something they think they have to do? How do you make that distinction? Does anybody want to comment on that?
This comes up a lot. I mean, we saw this so much during the summer when people were trying to decide how they were going to, if and how they were going to enter the discussion that was going on. I think the data was saying that from the time that COVID, hit the U.S., there were something like 30 million mentions over a 3-month period, whereas the Black Lives Matter movement had 2 or 3x of that in weeks. So it made it a place where people wanted to be, because that's where all the attention was. But the advice we gave to brands was that they really needed to enter that discussion in an authentic way, which means if you've never said anything, don't come out shooting with guns blaring, acting like you've always been a supporter of these causes when you haven't. It doesn't mean you can't enter the conversation, but it means you have to do it in a way that's very honest about your approach. You can say, we should have been in the conversation. We weren't before. We'd like to get in now, and this is how. But you have to be very, very careful about not overpromising, and whatever you say you're going to do, keeping your word around that. So I think you have to start by being honest about what you've done in the past and what you're trying to do now.
We had a conversation in our podcast with the head of activism for Ben & Jerry's, and he said that the companies that are really legitimate and are doing something significant, and the ones that are doing nothing at all are the most authentic. He said the ones that are sort of stuck in this middle place are the ones that tend to get in trouble. It's a really interesting conversation with Chris Miller.
Yeah. The other thing I'll say, Fred, I think, I mean, that's an interesting point, right? Because you look at companies like Ben & Jerry's, they've had the dismantle white supremacy platform for a long time. And if you look at a Netflix, they've been living their mission, right? So the fact that they've got all of this content, Black creators, they pulled major content creators for the last several years now. So the proof is already there, right? If you lift up the sheet a little bit, you can see what's really going on. So I think the key is to just try, know who you are and going into the discussion, and just honor that.
Exactly. Thank you,
Fred,
Rosanna. Yeah.
And Fred, can I just add one more thing? I think that's where the voices, the Black voices come in. And of course, decision-making voices is critical. But this is where you need to tap into the experience of people in the Black community in public relations, Black-owned firms, whether they're small or large. But partnering with them would really help to bring in some of the information that some of these brands might need, especially those that have never participated in these kinds of activities before, because they may need, there's a learning curve that's involved. And so when you bring in people who know the Black community and who can articulate it to the corporations and help to guide them in the way so that they can create messaging that's not offensive to the community and that's supportive and that can show them in a very positive light, but also, you know, people will be aware that they've not been involved before, but they're learning and they're willing to admit that they don't know. They haven't been involved, but they're willing to move forward and learn.
You know, you're right, Julia. And Melissa was talking about the importance of inside voices before, but there's also an importance for outside voices to get other perspectives before you make a decision. Jim, we're about to wrap up. I'd like to put up that one last slide, if you don't mind, and end on a positive note. We ask Americans how they feel, what emoji describes how they feel in 2021. And remarkably, given the trials and tribulations we've all been through in 2020, hopeful was the overall choice of Americans in terms of their approach to the future. And according to our researchers in Annenberg, this means that Americans are either really stupid or very resilient, one or the other. And I'm going with resilient. And I think that there's, despite all the things we've been going through, there's a lot of hope about the future. And I wondered if any of our panelists wanted to echo that sentiment and talk about how you think this coming year is going to feel for you and your company.
I can speak to this, Fred. As a parent of 3 small kids, and I'm working from home with my husband working from home, I feel like I've gone through those emotions that you just listed in like a 4-hour span. So I think, you know, there's definitely times where all those worrisome emotions come into play, but seeing what, at least from my side and my company and our teams have done during this time period gives me a lot of hope and optimism for next year. I think we're all realistic that, you know, things aren't going to bounce back immediately or even maybe throughout 2021, but they will bounce back. And it's going to take a lot of the effort and hard work that's already been taking place to just continue and to maintain that positive momentum. And it's hard. And I think having people speak their truth on how hard it is so important, and having that outlet. But at the same time, knowing that, you know, this hard work is only going to set us up for much more success in the future.
That is a very good
answer.
answer.
She said that really, really well. And I would pile on and say I am incredibly hopeful too. And I pair it though with accountability. We talked about this actually in our employee resource group today in terms of how do we even feel about the election and a lot of conversation around, you know, letting all of that flow in terms of, yes, we have to have a place where people can talk it out. But I pair my optimism with accountability because I know the things that I can do and I just have to keep at it. And so I think if there is that attitude of what are the small things that I can change, even if they seem small, that actually fuels that hope.
Anybody else?
Just add that I think that the skills that all the students coming out of Annenberg have are going to be, and will continue to be incredibly in high demand. I mean, the communicate, we're all busy. Like this is the time when it gets to these type of moments, like this is when organizations really lean on their communications teams. And so I do think that the generation that's listening to this call and that are part of Annenberg are going to be very well positioned in the future. And that are the skills that they're learning now are going to be incredibly helpful for the future.
So it may be tough for a little while, but it's going to get a lot better, right?
I agree.
Anybody else on hope?
I think it's already better. We're already seeing companies spending dollars and planning ahead, and the money that they've saved and put aside for because they were worried, they're now spending the dollars and looking to the future on what they could be doing. But I do think that we need to push companies a little bit more about focusing more on equity and not on things that are comfortable. Because I do see the spending going to organizations that everybody feels comfortable with, and that's not going to solve things like equity and inclusion. So I do want us to push a little bit more, but I think anybody in PR is in really good shape for the future because PR is becoming more and more important, both internal and external communication. So,
And you can see on my shirt, Bill, I love PR. I want to thank this panel for participating with us tonight. I want to thank our 45 contributors to the Relevance Report, and to thank all of you for joining us. At USC, we're really hopeful and we're really resilient, and our slogan is fight on. So with that, I'm going to say good night. Download our report from our website, listen to our podcast, and I hope to see you all in person sometime soon. Thank you very much, and good night. Fight on.
Bye.
Good night, Fred.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fred.
Thank you.
thanks, Fred.